All right. What's good, y'all? It's your boy, your favorite conservatarian, Jeff Charles, and this is another live stream from A Fresh Perspective with me, Jeff Charles. And I'm very excited about today. We're going to talk about some good stuff, but yeah, let me know you're alive in the chats. I know I got started a little bit late. I was having more technical issues, but not as bad as the ones that I was having before. But we're going to talk about a few things today. I think it'll be a decent conversation. But before I get started, I just want to let you know that to support, if you want to support my work, you can join my locals.com community at afreshperspective.locals.com. It's only $4.99 per month, and you get access to premium content that other people don't get. And again, only $4.99 per month, which is less than the price of coffee, like I always say, at Starbucks. But if you want to do a one-time donation, that also works. If you want to support my work, and here are the links right here, and they're also in the show notes. I appreciate any and everything. And also, I have the ability to accept super chats. So if you have a burning question, or if you just want to support me, or if you just want to tell me that my hat looks funny, do a super chat. It's awesome. It's easy and not even an inconvenience. So before I get started, I also wanted to let you know to check out a YouTube channel called Politically Provoked. It's a brand new channel, but I like what they're doing. And I've done an interview with them. They interviewed me on my positions on different issues. It's a show for people who enjoy watching debates, especially civil debates between people on the right and on the left and everything in between. And I participated in a debate panel this past Friday. That was pretty awesome. Really good conversation with some really good people, both on the right and the left, talking about Joe Biden's first 100 days in office. So check that out. I'll try to remember to put that in the show notes as well. But the YouTube channel is called Politically Provoked, and they've got some good stuff going on over there. So definitely give that a listen and a watch. And one more thing. In case you guys didn't know, the very first episode of my audio-only podcast dropped last Thursday. It's available on iTunes, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts. And it went pretty well. I talked about a lot of good stuff. Now, the stuff that I do on my podcast is not going to be the same as I do on my live stream. I know a lot of YouTubers will just take the audio from their videos and then turn that into a podcast. That's not what I'm doing. When you listen to the podcast, it's all new. It's all different content. There might be some overlap, but in general, I'm going to be talking about different subjects on the podcast than what I do here on my live streams and in my other videos. So that is going to be dropping every Tuesday and Thursday. Tuesday will be interviews that I've done in the past, or the interviews that I'll do in the future. And on Thursday, that's where you'll get my commentary on the issues of the day. Do me a huge favor, especially for you iTunes users. Go ahead and give me a 5-star rating. I really appreciate it. I'm trying to get into the new and noteworthy section of iTunes. I'm already ranking higher than I thought I would, but I want to get into that the new and noteworthy section on iTunes so that I can attract more readers and all that good stuff. Also, if you leave me a short review, it doesn't have to be a dissertation, just a few sentences saying, that you like my stuff, because I know you do. Well, come on now. We both know that you guys love my content. I'm just going to be a little bit humble there. I know I make the best content in the world. I know a lot about content, and mine is the very best, bigly. That was my Trump impression. Wasn't very good, huh? Oh, well. But I would appreciate it a lot. And also, please share it as well. And also, if you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe to this YouTube channel and also to my podcast. You guys are awesome. Dang, I already got a super chat. Awesome. Mrs. Pinky, don't hate because I double my audio. I don't even know what that means, sis. I don't know what that means. Let's see. Yes, Greg does support Jeff for the price of coffee every month, and I highly appreciate it. You guys are awesome. So let's try this again. Without further ado, let's get started. We got a few things that we're going to talk about today. And I'm going to be talking about the recent development with a Chauvin juror speaking out on the jury and explaining how they arrived at the conclusion that they did for the verdict. Also damages the narrative that the jury was influenced by civil unrest and the threat of riots and Mad Max, Maxine Waters. But there's also another part in there too that I'm also going to let you know about to be fair, as far as whether or not a case can be made for an appeal and if that will even go through. We'll also be talking about Ron DeSantis, front runner for the presidency, for the presidential nomination so far, although it's still far too early to say that. I know some people are talking about Tim Scott. I'm not getting my hopes up until he says he's running. But this is an important story, especially when it comes to censorship on the big tech platforms. And then lastly, we're going to talk about something that I tweeted yesterday about one of the reasons why the Republican Party and the conservative movement constantly loses battles in the culture war that we could be winning. So I'm going to take a little sippy sip from my magic water jug. And let's get it started. So first, I'm going to talk about Derek Chauvin. So the latest news, and you may have heard of it, but there was a juror, number 52, who participated in the trial of Officer Derek Chauvin, and he's been making the rounds on the media. And he's spoken with the Wall Street Journal. He has spoken with Good Morning America and also some other radio shows and podcasts. And he essentially is giving his account of how the jury decided to convict Officer Chauvin on all 3 counts in the connection with the murder of George Floyd. And as you already know, ever since that verdict was announced, there's been huge debate about it, right? Team Chauvin is pissed. They wanted him to get off. And the people who thought he should be punished, most of them got what they wanted, although some felt that some of the charges were unfair, like the 2nd-degree murder and the 3rd-degree murder. And, there can be arguments made about that. But the vast majority of people in general, Republican or Democrat, felt that Chauvin should have gotten some punishment at least. But the big narrative that is being floated, and really this narrative was floating even before the verdict, even before the trial, the Team Chauvin crowd was arguing that if he is convicted, it will be because he didn't get a fair trial, because the jury would have been motivated by this threat of riots. They would have voted to convict because they were afraid that if they voted to acquit, there would be riots and chaos and civil unrest. Now, I'm not saying that wouldn't have happened, because I think it would have. However, as of today, there is no evidence that the jury was influenced by outside factors. Now, there was another juror who was actually an alternate, but sat through the entire trial, didn't even know she was an alternate. And she came to the conclusion that Chauvin was guilty as well on all 3 counts. But when she was filling out her application or her questionnaire or whatever they give you when you're doing jury duty, as she mentioned to one of the interviewers that she was feeling a little bit of trepidation about being part of the jury because if she decided that her opinion was that he was innocent or not guilty, then that could result in riots. However, she did not say that her decision was based on that. That was twisted by a lot of conservative commentators, or they left things out. They left out the part where she was only talking about choosing to be on the jury, or actually, in her case, it wasn't really a choice, I don't think. But still, when the question was raised as to whether or not she wanted to be on the jury. But now a new one has come out. His name is Brandon Mitchell. He's a 31-year-old high school basketball coach. And like I said, he was juror number 52. And he was interviewed by the Wall Street Journal. And according to the Journal, they said, quote, "The jury got the case on a Monday evening after a full day of closing arguments. Once they had selected a foreman, they took an initial vote with 11 of the 12 jurors ready to convict Mr. Chauvin of manslaughter. The lone holdout told the group that the juror needed more time," Mr. Mitchell said. So the jurors had a chance to explain why they felt the charge fit. So what he's explaining here is that 11 of these jurors were ready to convict at least on manslaughter. And then there was one who wanted to chew on it a little bit more and discuss the issue before they came to a conclusion. Makes sense. Nothing wrong with that. But the authors of the article said by the time it was the holdout's chance to speak, the juror had already come around. So by the time it was the hesitant jurors' turn to give their opinion, they basically came around after the conversation. Now, it proceeded in the same way with the other charges. So on third degree and then on second degree, this same juror was still hesitant. But by the time they had their discussion about it, they engaged in conversation, and then they came around to believing that he was guilty of the other two charges as well. It took them about 3.5 hours to reach a consensus on third degree murder. And by the time they got to second degree, it only took about 20 to 30 minutes. So I'm guessing in that 3.5 hour conversation, there was already enough for all the jurors to agree that he was guilty of those charges. Now, Mitchell told the Wall Street Journal that each member of the jury had their own opinions on exactly when Chauvin violated the law. So some may have thought that he violated the law once he put the knee on the neck, or some maybe thought he was violating the law after 5 minutes or whatever. I'm just making this up, but they don't all agree as to exactly when he violated the law. But they also agreed in the end that he had violated the law. Mitchell said they all agreed at some point that it was too much, like what Officer Chauvin was doing was too much. And what's also interesting is that this Mitchell guy says he also felt a level of sympathy for Derek Chauvin, which if I were him, I wouldn't have said that out loud, but I get it. I mean, he says he's a human too. And Mitchell said that when he saw the verdict being read and saw Chauvin's reaction, he said, quote, "I almost broke down from that. Quote, we decided his life. That's tough. That's tough to deal with. Even though it's the right decision, it's still tough." And I can totally understand that. That is not a position I would ever want to be in. So the question came up inevitably as to whether or not Mitchell believed that that outside forces influenced the decision that the jury made. They asked if he thought that the threat of riots or statements made by politicians or other factors brought about that verdict. Now, here's what he says. Let me go back here. He said, and by the way, this was, okay, yeah. So with the Wall Street Journal, he said that he did see news reports about the protests last year, but he did not believe other jurors were influenced by the unrest. He says, quote, "The human aspect of it, in terms of watching somebody die every day, it outweighs that tenfold." So watching the footage over and over again and seeing the testimony, that outweighed anything that outside influences could be saying. Also, when he also made an appearance on Good Morning America, and he repeated that contention. He says, quote, "Those things are so secondary throughout the trial, because throughout the trial, you're watching somebody die on a daily basis. So that stress alone is enough to take your mind away from whatever is going on outside the four walls of the courtroom. That wasn't even something that was in any of our minds." And that's what he said to Robin Roberts. He also talked about why he came to the conclusion that he did and why the rest of the jury did as well. He said that before the trial, he hadn't watched the entire bystander video of the incident before the trial. So he had watched clips of it, and he had watched, a certain level of content on it, but he hadn't watched the whole thing, which I think a lot of people didn't. But he said that was the most powerful evidence in the trial. But he also cited the testimony of Dr. Martin Tobin. He was the pulmonologist who testified as to how the actions of Chauvin and the other officers on the scene restricted Floyd's airflow, thereby causing his death. So here's another quote from Brandon Mitchell, quote, "He was the most excellent expert witness they could have had. He just solidified everything because he spoke so scientifically, but elementary." That's actually a compliment that I heard he got a lot. I remember during the trial, people were saying he broke things down in a way that was so easy to understand. And on the other hand, Mitchell just didn't think that Eric Nelson, who was Chauvin's defense attorney, was very persuasive. And other people have said that too. Lisa Christensen, the alternate juror, also said that he may have overpromised because he promised to give them a whole bigger picture of the context of what happened, and he didn't really deliver on that. Like, for instance, one of the witnesses, Dr. David Fowler, Mitchell says that he didn't find him to be very convincing. He said, "When Fowler was coming to the stand, I thought he might be able to possibly prove something else. but he didn't really tell me anything that I thought was concrete. And he brings up the theory that that George Floyd died because of carbon monoxide poisoning because his face was too close to the car to the exhaust pipe. And Mitchell says his contention that carbon monoxide poisoning may have killed Mr. Floyd didn't fly with the jury. He says, I don't think anybody paid that any mind, which makes sense. I mean, I get what Eric Nelson was trying to do. He was trying to get reasonable doubt in there, but I mean, that probably wasn't the best way to go. But again, he had to throw whatever he could at the situation. Now I'm going to go back to what Lisa Christensen said, and because they asked if she had been on the jury and not an alternate, if it ended up that she was in that room trying to decide, what did she believe? How would she have voted? And she said, quote, I would have voted guilty. However, at the end, the judge did read us the rules for deliberation, but it was quick and I could not absorb it. I would have said guilty on some level. After I was excused, I did not look at the jury instructions any longer. I do not know how hard the process was, but I feel like Chauvin is responsible for Mr. Floyd's death. So she probably would have voted for at least some level of guilt, maybe all three, maybe just manslaughter, maybe 2 out of 3, whatever. Now, again, people on the right, especially the authoritarian crowd. And by the way, I'm not saying that anybody who disagrees with the verdict is an authoritarian, but the authoritarian crowd on the right has been speculating that Chauvin went down because of the threat of civil unrest. And like I said, I did this in a previous video. I made this prediction that they were going to do this. And they were already priming us for that narrative before we even got close to the verdict. But there are a couple points of contention coming from the right. And I think this has a level of validity about some of the things that Brandon Mitchell said. For instance, when he did an interview on a radio show, I believe, he said he was asked what message he would give to people about saying yes to jury duty. And he said, quote, I mean, it's important if we want to see some change. We want to see some things going different. We got to get out there, get out into these avenues, get into these rooms and try to spark some change. And then he added, quote, jury duty is one of those things. Jury duty, voting, all the things we got to do. Now, I kind of get what he's saying here, but that probably was not the best way to present that, right? I mean, it kind of sounds like it can give the impression, especially for people who want to take it this way, that he joined the jury to become an activist. I don't think that's going to get Derek Chauvin off on appeal, though. I think it's a bad look, but I don't think they're going to have to come with something more than that. But there's still more to this. Now, remember, I'm not like a lot of my fellow conservative commentators. I'm not afraid to give facts that could go against what I feel. And you already know, I always believe that Chauvin was guilty and that he should serve time for what he did. And that was based on the video, that was based on the medical examiner's report, which said a lot of things that conservatives left out to promote a narrative. But there's another aspect of this that I want you to see, and let me go ahead and pull it up here. All right. So it appears that, and I don't know if the defense missed this or if the defense just didn't think this was that big of an issue, but this is on RT, but I mean, it's been reported by other outlets. It looks like Brandon Mitchell had attended, he attended the March on Washington that was linked to, to be kind of an homage to Martin Luther King's March on Washington. And that wasn't really about police brutality. That was about a lot of subjects, and police brutality just happened to be one of them. So a lot of people are using that to say, oh, well, if he went to this march, that means that he wasn't going to be fair to Chauvin. No evidence of that. But here's one thing that might work. Where to go? In one picture, he is shown wearing a Black Lives Matter shirt. Wait, let me switch it over. It's pulling up the tweet and I don't want it to do that. 1 second, bear with me. Let me just switch it over to Twitter. All right. Okay. Now, I'm not paying attention to the text of this tweet because obviously this Team Chauvin here, but I'm going to just pay attention to the pictures. Now, he's appeared with a Black Lives Matter shirt on, but not just a Black Lives Matter shirt, one that says, "Get your knee off our necks." Now, Black Lives Matter alone doesn't mean that he was biased. I mean, people can say Black Lives Matter. I say Black Lives Matter, but I will defend a cop when he deserves it. But the fact that it's specifically for George Floyd, that's not looking too good. This might be grounds for an appeal. Again, this doesn't mean that Chauvin's going to get off, because they still have a lot to prove. They still have to prove that he was not swayed by the prosecution. Also, the question's going to come up, why, if this were an issue, why didn't Eric Nelson, Chauvin's defense attorney, get him disqualified as a juror? Because they go through your social media. Like, they vet you fully before letting you on a jury. It could have been an oversight, or maybe Eric Nelson didn't think that this was enough to where he believed that Brandon Mitchell wouldn't have an objective point of view here. But that'll be something interesting that comes up. Now, in the end, I still don't believe that Officer Chauvin is going to get off. I think at the very most, they might be able to overturn that second-degree murder. But even then, he's still going to serve a lot of time in prison. I mean, he's facing up to 40 years. I don't think he'll get that. I think he'll get something closer to 20 years. But I think that's the best that they've got. I mean, Team Chauvin is hoping that he'll get fully acquitted for whatever reason. And honestly, I think they're going to be disappointed. So let's see what you guys think here. Let me take a look at the chat. Let's see. What's up, Trenchwork Chronicles? Nice to see you, Devin. We will be chatting this week. This is Pinky. So they did talk about the reasons why they convicted and didn't just vote out of fear. Interesting. Yeah, I expect to see more of this. I mean, this guy's making the rounds, but I wouldn't be surprised if other jurors came out and said the same thing. I mean, the bottom line is, and people don't want to admit this, but the prosecution's case was very strong. I think the defense did a good job as well, but they didn't have that much to work with. The bottom line is, it's very hard to convince people that if somebody dies when you're kneeling on their neck for 9 minutes, that your knee had absolutely nothing to do with the death. The defense had to prove that he was basically about to die anyway, and that's a high bar. I mean, no sane person is really going to believe that. People will believe that if they want to believe it, but realistically, it doesn't make sense. Let's see. David Gray, yeah, his problem is that he appears to have lied twice on the question sheet and once directly to Judge Cahill. That may prove to be a problem. Now, some people, because one of the things that they're taking issue with is that he said that he hadn't really heard much about the civil case, which makes sense. I think a lot of people don't really pay attention to civil cases as much as they do criminal cases. So they'll have to prove that he's lying about that, and I don't see how they would. I think it's very possible that he didn't say he didn't hear anything about the civil case, but he said he didn't hear much about it. And I'm not sure what the other supposed lie was. I'll take a look at that. Let's see what else we got here. Okay, another good point. Exactly. Does have that perception, like activism. I agree with the verdict, but I'm always suspicious of the media whores. Yep. And I can understand why people might think he's coming off as one. He plugged his podcast a few times. So, I mean, again, doesn't mean that Chauvin wasn't guilty, but I mean, this could be used as grounds for an appeal. I don't think it'll go anywhere, but I can understand people being concerned about this. What I don't take seriously, though, is the notion that it was the threats of riots that prompted the verdict. I don't buy that at all. Conservatives are claiming this without giving any concrete evidence because we don't have any yet. Now, we're supposed to be the facts don't care about feelings people, but this case, just like many of others, shows me that conservatives don't really mean what they say when they say facts don't care about your feelings. In my experience, conservatives have been just as emotionally tied to narratives as people on the left. Hate to break it to you, but you guys know I get shit from both sides, so I experience it. I know. I can see it. Let's see. Big appeal vibes from this guy. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think they can use it for that. And honestly, if I was a defense attorney, I would too. I mean, I get it. Let's see. I think I'm going to move on. Okay. Were Chauvin's previous complaints allowed as evidence in this trial? No, they were not, Greg. They were not. I'm not sure why, but they weren't. And it's very interesting. I'm going to digress for 30 seconds here, but it's interesting how the right prioritized George Floyd's history, but didn't want to talk about Chauvin's history. He had 17 complaints against him. 9 of those were for excessive force. Yeah, that's relevant. I'm sorry, that's more relevant than George Floyd's criminal history, because his criminal history doesn't even enter into this at all. So, yeah. But Chauvin's history shows that the Minneapolis Police Department wasn't doing what they should have been doing. They weren't taking them seriously. And if they had, there's a good chance that George Floyd would be alive today, and Derek Chauvin would not be in jail. Okay, so I'm going to move on. I am going to talk about Ron DeSantis. And I'm going to talk about, wait, where'd it go? Social media censorship. So, and this isn't really about DeSantis. This is really about Florida in general. This is about Florida's state government. So their legislature and their governor. So in case you haven't heard, Florida is poised to become the first state to take action against big tech companies that engage in biased censorship practices. So this bill has already passed the state Senate and the House. And Republican Governor Ron DeSantis is reportedly set to sign a bill that would punish social media companies who deplatform politicians based on politics. So the New York Post, they reported, quote, the bill passed by the GOP-dominated state legislature Thursday and awaiting Governor Ron DeSantis' signature would make it a crime to remove state political candidates from Twitter and Facebook, and would mete out penalties of up to $250,000 a day for any statewide candidate who's deplatformed. Removing local candidates would cost the company $25,000 per day. Now, this bill would also require these tech companies to provide users with 7 days notice that they are subject to being banned and allow them to remedy the issue. It would also allow them to suspend users for up to, it would still allow them to suspend users for up to 14 days. So basically, if you violate the terms and conditions, these companies would have to give you 7 days notice, tell you what you did wrong, and give you a chance to fix it. And then if you don't, then they can suspend you for up to 14 days. Now, a state representative named John Snyder, he told NBC News that this bill is about, quote, sending a loud message to Silicon Valley that they are not the absolute arbiters of truth. He also said, quote, what this bill does is send a loud message that the Constitution does not have an asterisk that says only certain free speech, or that only certain speech is free and protected. Now, obviously, people are criticizing this. They're saying that it violates the First Amendment, and this is going to get challenged in court. This is just, it's going to happen. I don't know if it'll make it to the Supreme Court, but I could easily see that happening because it does raise that question. Does it violate the First Amendment? But the thing is it's not silencing these companies. It's not allowing them, it's not preventing them from engaging in speech, but it is kind of policing how they apply their censorship practices. And it does prevent them from violating the free speech of their users. NBC News, they also noted that Facebook and other social media services have long, often elaborate rule books for governing what's allowed on their platforms, which the companies regulate as private forums. But as more political speech has moved online, enforcing those rules consistently and without major pushback has become a constant challenge. Now, this is just a really nice way of saying that social media companies like Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and others have these very ambiguous and complicated terms and conditions to make it easier for them to ban people that they don't like. They can just tell you, oh, you violated the terms and conditions. And in a lot of these cases, they won't even tell you what you did that violated the terms and conditions. And they've repeatedly come under fire for censoring specifically conservative voices online. This doesn't mean that they don't do the same to leftists, but they don't do it as much. And I've experienced this personally. You guys probably remember me talking about this. Left-leaning people can get away with some stuff that I couldn't get away with. Like, for instance, I'm not going to say the word here because I don't want YouTube to do what Twitter did, but I got suspended for 7 days because I made fun of Black Democrats who call Black conservatives by a certain epithet that starts with an E and ends with an N. They call them raccoons. That's my code word for it. Actually, that's Amazing Lucas's code word for it. But here's the thing. I got suspended for that. And I looked all through Twitter to see tons of Black Democrats using this word against Black conservatives, and their accounts were intact. So it's kind of difficult to say that there's no bias in censorship. As a matter of fact, former employees of Twitter and Facebook have admitted that they shadow ban people based on politics, and that they also suspend people based on politics. So this is an issue, and it's going to come to a head. I think this is the beginning of this coming to a head because Florida's government is striking back. What happens if the court upholds this ruling or upholds this law? What happens if Texas adopts a similar law? What happens if Alabama does and other red states? They may not be able to get every single state to adopt this type of legislation, but you don't need it. If you got even half of the country's red states to adopt similar legislation, it's going to cost them a lot of money to engage in biased censorship. So here's the thing. I mean, a lot of people on the right are hesitant about supporting this type of action or supporting government involvement. And I understand that because it's tough for me. I mean, especially I used to be strictly against this, saying let the free market handle it. But here's the thing. I mean, others, they've pointed out that these companies have amassed a troubling level of power over American society. It can't be denied. They have tremendous influence. As a matter of fact, I believe that big tech has as much influence as the activist media and even as the government. A small group of people is able to dictate what we can and can't see and what we can and can't say. One question that I was asked when I did my interview for Politically Provoked, he asked me if I'm going to try to phrase it the way he did, but if people can determine what you can say and not say online, are they also able to determine what you can see and cannot see? Yes, that's exactly what they're doing. They don't want certain ideas out there. And they become so powerful that even though I hate it, I can see the case for having at least some government involvement in this, because at the end of the day, these people can influence elections. And we've already seen that Google has been willing to use their power to try to influence elections. Some of the people that work for them have admitted to it. So yeah, this is going to be challenged in the courts. I don't know what's going to happen, but even if it's voted down or if it's ruled unconstitutional, this is not the end of the story. I mean, people are going to be pushing for these companies to be regulated like utilities. And it's just going to be very interesting to see how this turns out. I think this is going to be a battle that is fought over the next few years. And it's kind of scary because, again, if only a few people can determine what we are allowed to read or watch or listen to, and these people have a very distinct political agenda, whether it was left or right. I mean, if this were on the right, I'd be concerned too. Then they have a lot of power, and I'm not convinced that they should be allowed to have that level of power. At a certain point, this is not the free market because it's not free. So what do you guys think? Let's see what you're talking about here. Go back up. So why did Florida specify for politicians and not all Florida citizens? I'm not sure. They probably thought it'd be easier to start with politicians because you can make more of the case for that, especially since these social media companies claim to give politicians special treatment. But you saw they banned Trump. Facebook is expected to announce their final decision on whether Trump can have an account on their platform. I suspect that they're going to say no. Then again, sometimes Zuckerberg does buck the trend. Sometimes he does go against what the far left wants. So that's anybody's guess. But I mean, we saw them do this to Laura Loomer and to other right-leaning politicians. And by the way, I mean, Laura Loomer, I think she's a crackpot. I'm not a fan of hers. At the same time, I don't believe that she should be silenced. Let's see. I'm all for it. Regulate them bigly. It will prevent further animosity / extremism to grow. Also, it may bleed out existing animosity. It's possible. I mean, because here's the thing. Just because they're censoring people who are legitimately horrible, it doesn't mean that they're not speaking. They're just speaking in an area where they can all congregate together and not be exposed to any opposing ideas. We know where that can lead. That can lead to radicalization. There are white supremacist groups who radicalize people that way. There are Islamic terrorist groups who radicalize people that way. The First Amendment was to protect us from government, not a private company. This can backfire. You might be right about that. I mean, because I always say, you know, if you talk about using the government, you got to imagine it being done to you. And that's what scares me about this, because let's say they regulate these companies and it's fine. Like, it just means that nobody's censored unless, you know, they really do an egregious violation and it's not based on political preference. Well, what's to stop the other guys from doing it to you when they get into office? What's to stop them from changing the rules in a way that targets only conservatives? That is what my concern is. Now, here's my opinion on it. This is unavoidable. The government is going to become involved in this. There's no way that they're going to stay out of it. Democrats want to regulate social media for different reasons, some of which I agree with, actually, when it comes to like privacy and stuff like that. But there are Democrats like Joe Biden who want to regulate Facebook and Twitter in a way that doesn't allow certain speech online. And what they're doing is they're claiming that they're going to go after white supremacist content, like blatantly racist stuff. But we all know that that's not really what they want to do. They target speech that nobody likes under the guise of wanting to keep those platforms clean and stop stop the spread of misinformation. That's not why they're doing this, because you see CNN and other left-wing activist media outlets peddle in misinformation all the time. Media on both sides does this, but they only want to target the right, and we know where they really want to go with this. So it's tough, but at the same time, since this is inevitable, this is going to happen, some regulation is going to happen, I would rather for conservatives to be involved in that conversation rather than just abdicating it to the left, because we know where that's going to go. Look at the conversation on race. I'm going to talk about that in just a few minutes. But conservatives decided not to engage in that conversation, and now we're dealing with critical race theory. But I digress. I'm giving you a preview of what's to come in a few minutes. Let's see. Now, this is a good point. Social media companies aren't as private as most people think. They're pretty much in bed with the government. This is true. I mean, especially if you know about the Facebook to government pipeline and vice versa, government to Facebook. A lot of people that serve in the government are now governing Facebook and vice versa. And the same is also true for Twitter. The government and these social media companies are like this. I know that the Senate has those hearings where they drag Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey in front of Congress and say some very strongly worded statements and platitudes for the cameras. But don't buy it. Yeah, I think a lot of those politicians do want to do something about it, but a lot of these people are in the same bed. Mrs. Pinky, it seems like the conservatives can't compete, so they're using the government to come in and restrain big tech. Yeah, it's coming out that way. And here's the thing. I mean, even if conservatives built their own platform, like Parler did, or like Gab, that could be a solution to this. I mean, especially when it comes to cancel culture and other, hard left phenomenons. The problem is, I mean, here's a problem with that. What I don't like about it, although I do understand why it might be necessary, and I'd rather this be done than nothing. But now we have a more siloed country. We don't have people on the right interacting with people on the left because social media is now siloed. You've got your right-wing social media. You've got your left-wing social media. You do the hokey pokey and you turn, okay, sorry, I couldn't resist. But yeah, you've got siloed social media where we already have a problem with echo chambers, right? This will only exacerbate that problem. Again, I would rather for conservatives to be able to speak. So if it comes to that, then fine, we got to do it. I would rather there be a different solution. But again, this is going to happen. I'm guaranteeing you that we will have government involved in social media, and it's not going to take that long. So again, I would rather, if that's going to happen, and it is inevitable, I would rather for conservatives to be involved in that conversation. I would rather for Republican leaders to be involved in that conversation rather than to sit it out, because then we let them control everything. Let's see. Okay. So I am going to move on to the next and final topic here. And I think you guys will find this interesting. Get another magic water jug here. Now, I want to talk about how the conservative movement can start getting some wins in the culture. We take a lot of L's, and we've been taking L's for decades in the culture war. The left has the culture in a vice grip. And I'm not saying that we haven't won any victories. We have. And I think we've won some important victories. But we are nowhere near to being dominant, and we are nowhere near to being as competitive as we should be. So I'm going to tell you why this is. I'm going to tell you why conservatives have had trouble winning over the culture. This is not the only reason, but this is one of the main reasons. I would say this might even be like 75 to 80% of the problem. The thing is that one of the worst habits that the right can't seem to shake is the tendency to base its entire platform on opposing the left. So this is a tendency that has allowed the hard left, or not even just the hard left, the left in general. It's enabled the Democrats to label conservatives as reactionaries. You hear this word a lot. You know, the right is full of reactionaries or emotional reactionaries. And unfortunately, there is far too much truth to this contention. There's way too much truth to ignore this accusation out of hand. Some people aren't going to want to hear me say this, but when the left labels the right as reactionaries, they are right. They may exaggerate it, just like they do everything else, but I'm sorry, they are correct. And we always play into their hands when we basically base our opinions on what they're doing. I mean, I'm going to say that again. We always play into their hands when we base our opinions on what the left is doing or what the left is saying. It's almost like we can't look at an issue unless we are doing so through the lens of the left. We look at every issue through the lens of so-called progressivism. It's like we can be presented with an issue. When we're presented with an issue, we say, what does the left think about it? And then we take the polar opposite position without applying any kind of critical thinking, without applying any kind of nuanced thought, without looking at the evidence and following where it leads. We just take our cues from the Democrats and the activist media. Now, I'm not saying we do this literally. I'm not saying that, if you go to the average Republican and say, what do you think about bail reform? They're going to come back and say, well, what do the Democrats say about it? And then form their opinion on that. They don't do that consciously, but that is in effect what we do. Actually, I was just having a conversation over lunch with Ross Schumann, and we're going to be talking about this on my show. And he talked about bail reform and how a lot of Republicans have just this knee-jerk reaction against it, even though it is in line with conservative thought. Now, the thing is, we would get a lot further if we broke this habit. We will get a lot further if we were able to analyze issues independent of what the left thinks. If we can take an issue like, again, example, bail reform, without even focusing on what the left is saying about it. We can take a look at the facts. We can look at the evidence. We can weigh the arguments and follow where that leads, instead of just saying, well, I'm just going to go for the polar opposite of what the left thinks. Okay, well, Democrats came out for not throwing yourself off a cliff. Would you throw yourself off a cliff? I mean, this is something that we made fun of Democrats for when Trump was in office, right? Trump, one of the things you got to give it to Trump. He was one of the few Republicans who was able to turn the left into reactionaries, because they always reacted to what he said or did. They're still doing it. I mean, you saw what Biden did when he first took over. What is it, 94 executive orders now, specifically, and most of which are specifically designed to overturn what Trump did. They made fun of Trump for doing that with Obama, and now they're doing it far more than Trump ever did. But he's the only one that's been able to do that. Trump was not a reactionary. He had his own thoughts on how things should be. He said, we need to do something about immigration, about the economy, trade, China, whatever. And then the Democrats were forced to just respond to what he did instead of using critical thinking and actually forming an actual opinion on it. But that's a digression. Here's the thing. Like I was saying, we're going to get further if we learn how to analyze the issues without focusing on what the left does. Now, I'm talking to rank and file conservatives, but I'm also talking about conservative influencers, commentators, politicians. Even more than that, we need to recognize that if we have an audience, if we influence conservatives, we need to be doing the research. We need to be telling them the truth. We need to be giving them the facts, even facts that may not jibe exactly with what we're saying. And the bottom line is we need to recognize there's something we need to recognize. We need to recognize something that most of us have been missing for decades. And like I said, this is the main reason why we lose. And I tweeted this yesterday. I tweeted, quote, Republicans will start winning more cultural battles when they stop being the opposition and start being the competition. I'm going to say it again. Republicans will start winning more cultural battles when they stop being the opposition and start being the competition. I did another tweet before that. I said, quote, Republicans stay losing because they don't have ideas. They will vigorously oppose what the left proposes without putting forward their own ideas to compete. The left's ideas win out because they have no competition, only opposition. So we may think that we're winning certain victories, but we're not, because all we're doing is opposing anything that the left says. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't oppose what the left says. I'm not saying that we shouldn't debunk the hard left's lies. I'm not saying that we shouldn't argue against their stupid arguments. That's all necessary. But the problem is that we focus far too much on that. And by the way, if you watch my series on the Lily White movement and how the Republican Party lost the black vote, this is exactly why FDR was able to get 70% of the black vote. He offered the New Deal. He offered socialism. And Republicans offered nothing. So even though socialism is a horrible idea, what are people going to choose? They're going to choose the party that actually came with some ideas. And the Republican Party didn't have any ideas for the black community. So the issue here is that conservatives focus more on talking about how the left is wrong about this and about that, without ever offering alternative conservative ideas to combat the foolishness on the left. We don't present a counter argument. We don't present an idea to compete. Now, I'm not saying that this applies to everybody, because there are some commentators who have offered solutions, or they'll say the left is wrong about this subject. Here's what conservatives think, and here's how it will look under conservatism. And again, this tendency shows up in how our influencers and politicians approach everyday issues. They're only focused on talking about how crazy and stupid the left is. Look at AOC, for example. As a matter of fact, let's take climate change, for example. Here's an example. So we're all aware that the Green New Deal is a load of crap. It's an absurd fantasy that would result in bigger and more intrusive government. In fact, we know that the Green New Deal isn't really even about climate change. They said it themselves. So we respond to it by mocking AOC for talking about cow farts and not having airplanes. And I get it. That's worth mockery. But it is very rare. Well, what do you usually not see? You don't see any right-leaning influencer outline a conservative free market solution to preserving the environment. You don't see a lot of people on the right putting forth free market ideas to deal with the issue of climate change. Because a lot of people, I mean, we can disagree, and I'm not an expert on climate change, but we may disagree as to the extent that man contributes to climate change. But most people aren't denying or aren't saying that man doesn't contribute anything to climate change. So if we are contributing something to it, there might be something that we can help to do to deal with it. But it doesn't have to be the government. Now, again, I've heard some people present solutions like that. Ben Shapiro has. He's talked about using different types of energy and how the free market is the best vehicle through which to do that. But in general, we're just saying, oh, the Green New Deal is so stupid. Well, they're going to win. They're going to win that battle. There's a good chance they'll win. Now, they may not, because the American public might just realize on their own that it's stupid. But still, they're going to get at least some of what they want from that Green New Deal, because we're not competing. We're not entering the battlefield of ideas against the Green New Deal. We're just talking about how stupid it is, which again, we should be doing, but not only. We have to do more than that. Let's talk about critical race theory. So critical race theory is how the far left is proposing to deal with problems like racial inequality and racial disparities between Black Americans and white Americans. And we've responded, and you see the furor over it, right? You see how crazy people are going. Many conservatives are rightly criticizing the ideas that are proposed by the theory. I mean, and they're especially talking about how destructive this can be if it's taught in our children's schools. So I tweeted about this last week when conservatives were pushing for banning the theory. Now, this was the same conversation that we were having back when President Trump banned it at the federal level, and also when it came to working with vendors and also using the theory during diversity training. People were all cheering, oh, it got banned, yay, we won, but we didn't. This was not a good long-term strategy. Biden's already reversed Trump's executive order, so critical race theory is back, right? And here's the thing. What can be banned can just be as easily reinstated once the other party gets back in charge. So when we talk about banning something and only relying on the government, we're talking about band-aids. We're not talking about long-term solutions. These are short-lived fancies that make us feel like we won a battle when we really won nothing. Now, here's what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that concerned parents should not have a say in what is being taught to their kids. I'm a parent, I get that. I'm not encouraging conservative parents not to run for school board or to vote against having CRT in their children's classrooms. The parents should decide what is being taught to their kids. So I'm not saying that that people at the local level shouldn't vote to remove that from the curriculum. What I'm saying is that we need to do more than that if we really want to defeat this idea. The way you squash a bad idea is by persuading as many people as possible that your idea is better. But the problem is we don't have any ideas. I mean, here's the thing. If we were to propose an alternative idea or solution on how to deal with racial inequality and racial disparities, we stand a much better chance of winning this battle decisively, a long-term victory instead of just something that makes us feel good. We have a better chance of changing minds. I mean, when we change minds through conversation, persuasion, and competition, then we don't have to worry as much about our policies being overturned, even if the other party takes over. If you make the idea of critical race theory so odious and your idea so attractive, then even if you lose election on the school board, the rank and file, they will be letting them know that, hey, you might be in charge, but you better not put that critical race theory back in there because we will vote you out in a nanosecond. And by the way, I'm just going to put this out there. When it comes to racial issues, which we should be engaging in, pretending that racism is all but dead in America is not presenting a viable alternative solution. Why not present conservative solutions? Now, I'm not saying people haven't come up with conservative solutions, but you're not going to hear any, well, I shouldn't say any. You're not going to hear a lot of right-wing commentators actually presenting solutions. They're just, bashing what the left does. Police brutality is another issue. Anybody can tell that there's an issue with police brutality. But do conservatives promote any solutions? Not many. There are some, but not many. How many influencers have you seen put forth an alternative theory to critical race theory? Pretty much none, which means that even if it's banned at the local level, eventually it's going to come back because the hard left is going to focus on persuasion and shoving this theory down our throats. So yeah, it may be banned in some counties now, but it's going to come back because they're going to change as many minds as possible, and they're going to be dominant because we are not engaging in the battlefield of ideas. We're not debating this the right way. And we need to move from being the opposition that just always says, no, you suck, your ideas suck. We need to move from that to saying, you suck, and here's our idea that's much better than yours. That it's not hard, but we don't do it. We always miss it. And the left benefits from that. And I always see people talking about Chloe Valdery, and I'm going to use her as an example. Here's a theory. Now, she has the theory of enchantment. And I'm not saying that I'm co-signing this theory just yet because I don't know enough about it, but at first glance, it seems like something that might work a lot better than what the left is suggesting. And by the way, she does not believe in critical race theory. She has spoken out against critical race theory. I'm not sure where she lies on the political spectrum. I don't know if she leans more left or more right or whatever, but she has an idea and it's worth exploring. So I'm going to put that up right now. This is from a TED Talk that she did. And it's a virtual TED Talk, but the TED Talk nonetheless. And here we go. I'm just going to play just a little part of this.
Now, there are three principles that are really the guideposts for the theory of enchantment. And it's important to understand them because I think that they will be useful in helping us heal our nation in this moment that we're dealing with racism and police brutality, and really needing to advance towards social justice and social change. So the three principles are very simple, and they are as follows. Number one, treat people like human beings, not like political abstractions. Number two, if you want to criticize to uplift and empower, never to tear down, never to destroy. And number three, try to root everything you do in love and compassion. Now, you can imagine, even if we as a nation were to implement the first principle, to try to live out that practice in our everyday lives, we would come so far. But we're not doing that at the moment. At the moment, we are prejudging people and treating people not like human beings, but instead like abstractions. We're caricaturing one another, we're stereotyping and reducing one another, and in the process, we're stereotyping and reducing ourselves. So I think that if we were able to internalize and implement all three principles of the theory of enchantment, we could foster better conversations that can help heal our nation and help us move forward. Thanks so much.
All right. So what do y'all think? I mean, those three principles, I wrote them down, so I'm gonna repeat them really quick. The theory of enchantment, the three principles are treat people as human beings and not as political abstractions. If you want to criticize to uplift and empower, never to tear down, never to destroy. And three, try to root everything you do in love and compassion. Now, I'm sure you'll agree with me when I say that most people would think that sounds a lot better than saying everybody's racist who doesn't agree with the left. I mean, because that's essentially what critical race theory is. It's saying that racism is dominant in every single American institution and that race is the center of everything that this country was built on. I'm paraphrasing. It's more nuanced than that. But still, that is essentially their point. Which do you think is going to sound better to people? What Chloe said or what the critical race theorists say? This could be an idea maybe that we can promote rather than just not engaging in the conversation and talking about how horrible critical race theory is. And again, I'm not co-signing this just yet. I need to learn more about it. I'm hoping to interview her and so that she can give me more insight. But even just that little section, that sounds good. If that's really what we're talking about here, that is much better. That's a much better way to deal with issues that talk about race and racism. And I think that could be a much better solution than relying on something that really is intended to divide, honestly. I think that critical race theory is a divisive theory, and I think it's being used as such deliberately. But the bottom line is, whether it's the theory of enchantment or something else, we need to come to the table with a better idea. And like I said, pretending that racism doesn't exist or that it's on life support, that's not the answer, because that is very clearly not true. And it's okay to say that. Like I always tell conservatives, acknowledging that racism has an impact is not going to turn you into Al Sharpton. See, the far left, they exaggerate racism and they make it seem as if, I always use this example, they always make it seem like there's a Klansman waiting behind every tree to lynch a black dude. Obviously, I'm exaggerating, but they do. They exaggerate the impact of racism. But on the right, they take the polar opposite view because they didn't come up with their own opinions on this. They just reacted to what the left did, which means that we don't have the chance to be the adults in the room and say, hey, racism does have an impact. It may not be as crazy as what AOC says it is, but What are the conservative solutions to that? What is the conservative answer to racial disparities? How would a conservative reverse the impact of redlining or of Jim Crow or of other racist policies that the government imposed that still have an effect today, even though they've been outlawed? What do we do about it? That's the conversation that we need to be having. When we have that conversation and we come up with solutions, now we're in the battlefield of ideas and we're becoming competition and not just opposition. We need to compete, not just oppose. If we only oppose, then we're not going to get the sale. I mean, my background is in sales. So all of my mentors in the world of sales, they told me, when you're trying to get a new prospect and they're already buying from the competition, the solution isn't to bash the competition. As a matter of fact, in that case, you want to acknowledge the good things about your competition and then sell your product and convince the customer that your product is better. You need to focus more on the benefits you bring to the table more than you do on why the competition sucks. The same principle applies here in politics. Now, again, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't call out the bad stuff on the left, but if that's all we're doing, we deserve to lose the culture war. We don't deserve to have a place in the culture war. Frankly, we're not going to make any inroads, and that's just the way people work. So, just wanted to leave you with that. I'll be talking more about this, but again, we're not going to get anywhere unless we move from becoming the party of opposition to the party of competition. So let's see what you guys are talking about here before we close out. Let's see. Conservatives should be on school choice 24/7. I agree. And a lot of conservatives have been really good on that issue. I will say that. A lot of conservatives have done well with promoting school choice. I talked to my friend and my mentor, Lenny McAllister, who works very deeply in this field. You can watch that interview. It was last Monday. Very enlightening. And I'm going to have him on again to go deeper on this, but he's been excellent on this issue. Let's see. Yeah, this is a good example. Yeah, seriously, what the hell is the right-wing healthcare plan? Remember when we had control of the two chambers of the legislature and the presidency and we did nothing about healthcare? They kept talking about how they were going to repeal it and replace it, but they never came up with the plan to replace Obamacare. So they can't complain if they're not going to put forth something better. Let's see what else we got here. Oh, that's interesting. Look up the American Conservation Coalition. It's a conservative environmentalism group. Okay, well, look them up. I'll look them up. Maybe I can interview some people from there. Let's see what else we got here. Chloe Valder uses a lot of cultural elements in her curriculum. Yeah, in that TED Talk, she did allude to talking about Kendrick Lamar and Moana, which is a great Disney movie, by the way. I don't care what anybody says. Moana is great. Didn't we try the 1776 project? Yeah, but no, I don't think that was serious. I mean, maybe I'm just being too cynical, but I don't think that was a serious thing. I mean, if anything, that Patriot history stuff, that was going to be just as bad as a 1619 project. I think it would have whitewashed our history because I think that there are people pushing for that. Now, I like this, Katie Bogren. The cure for CRT is authentic history being taught in schools, the good and the bad of American history without sugarcoating. I think that's what most people want. I mean, black, white, or otherwise. I think that's all we want. We just want the whole history to be told. I mean, you saw Kamala Harris and James Clyburn admit that this nation is not a racist nation. They agree with Tim Scott. And I mean, it's true. That doesn't mean that we don't have a problem with racism. Let's see what else we got here. She didn't address race. Fantastic automatic. I only played like 30 seconds of that. Come on now. Look it up. It's all about anti-racism. The theory of enchantment is all about anti-racism. It's just not critical race theory. I think you might actually like it. Knowing you, I think you would probably appreciate what she's saying more than the others. But maybe we can chat about that later. That's why the Platinum Plan didn't work, because it wasn't pushed. Yeah. Yep. They came up with that Platinum Plan, which was a good thing, but they waited until 30 days before the election and they didn't push it. They introduced it, but didn't push it. Bad idea. But again, That's the mistake that we've been making for decades. I'm not saying that we literally don't have any ideas. There are conservative ideas to solve some of these problems. We don't talk about them, or we give them a brief mention. Let's see. What else we got here? I can get behind that. Respectful. Yeah, I like what she said. I like what she said there. And I listened to the whole thing. I would encourage you to listen to the whole thing. And I think I put the link in the show notes already. Very interesting. But I want more information. I want to learn more first before I really go whole hog on it. Wait, I saw another one. Where'd it go? Where'd it go? Oh, come on. I saw one and I missed it. Here it comes. Okay, yeah, there we go. Gilgamesh's war cat. That's a good. She's talking about theory of enchantment. That's a good way. That's a good way forward. Now we need the big voices to echo that. Imagine what it would be like. I'm going to try to say this with a straight face. Imagine what it would be like if Charlie Kirk and Brandon Tatum and Candace Owens and a lot of the other commentators actually put forth a solution like this rather than just saying critical race theory is bad. I shouldn't be laughing at this. I'm laughing because I know that those folks would never do that. But I'm just saying, imagine what it would be like if our big time commentators like Tucker Carlson, if he said, hey, critical race theory sucks, but here's a better theory for dealing with racial disparities. How much more would that add to the conversation? It would drive the hard left nuts. They would be screaming all over themselves. Like it would be hilarious because that is the last thing that they would want. Trust me, the hard left loves that our conservative influences are not willing to have serious conversations on these things. But imagine what if they did? What if they did? How much different would it be? How many more minorities could we win over to our side if our main influencers took a theory like the theory of enchantment or something else in that same vein and said, hey, this is how we deal with racial disparities? I couldn't even imagine. That's why I'm laughing. It's sad, but it's sad that I'm even laughing at it, but it's true. You know I'm right. Let's see. Oh, okay, Brown Mamba. Or Brown Mamba. Republicans really are nothing more than a dumb reaction to the left. They support all these tough on crime laws, yet call Joe Biden a racist for his crime bill. Which is it, GOP? Yeah, kind of hard to present an alternative solution when a lot of you agree with what the Democrats did. Oh, I bought Chloe's course. It's wonderful. Okay. All right. I might have to do the same. I agree. The 1776 project wasn't good at all. It is another example of the failed GOP going the opposite direction and not competing. Yes. But this was like going the opposite direction under the guise of competing. Really, all this was a reaction to the 1619 project. And they were just going to go in the vastly opposite direction. This is true. As Black people, race has defined our Americanism. We are comfortable talking about it straight shot. I don't disagree. I think more people on the right need to be willing to talk about it. Honestly, I think a lot of, especially white conservatives, I think most of them have good motives. They're afraid to talk about it because they're always being called racist for no good reason. And so if they talk about it and they maybe make a mistake and say something wrong, and by the way, this applies to white liberals too. I've read this, I've noticed this, that they're afraid of saying something offensive because the hard left encourages a harsh reaction. They want punitive measures if somebody says something wrong or they say something insensitive or if they accidentally make a comment not knowing that it's offensive. They don't want you to just come back and just take the person aside and talk to them privately and say, hey, this is why that was offensive. I know you didn't mean to be offensive. This is why. They hate that. They don't want that because that is a more peaceful way of resolving it, and they don't want peace. Again, I'm talking about the hard left, not everybody on the left. So I think that approach was purposely taken to make white people afraid to talk about racial issues. That's my little cynical conspiracy theory. Yeah, Kira does a great job at that. If only they hired or interviewed her. Yeah, she did a live stream on it today, and I wish she would have done it earlier because then I could have played it in here. But she's another one. She's going to bring solutions. She's going to bring a proposal of what she thinks should happen, and I respect the hell out of her for it. That's why I love me some Kira Davis. What about Shelby Steele? I haven't really gotten into Shelby Steele, not because I dislike him. I don't know much about him. A lot of the more older school Black conservatives, I know some of them, but I didn't really get into them. They didn't really influence, me as far as my conservatism. Yeah. Let's see. White conservatives need to leave their comfort zone and stop being rigid in their ways. And here's the thing: in defense of white conservatives, and I'm probably going to do a video on this tomorrow. I don't fully blame white conservatives. I do blame them to a certain extent for not understanding these issues. But the thing is, when all of your influencers have said the same thing for decades, then this is the inevitable result. I'm going to go more into that tomorrow, but I do want to explain why I don't fully blame white conservatives. I think that other people are more to blame for this. I believe influencers are more to blame for the ridiculous attitudes that a lot of people on the right have towards the Black community. Let's see. Tiffany, I have had some great conversations with people about race just by coming in respectfully and from a place of wanting understanding and perspective. And you know what? The 90% of Black people, that's all they want. Probably even higher than that. Your regular rank and file people, if you come just wanting to ask and not trying to lecture us about how we should feel about this or that, but asking honest questions and engaging in honest dialogue, we love it. Now, the ones that had the microphone, the blue check marks, they don't want that either. They just want compliance. But you don't have to deal with those people. Deal with people who are on that level, who actually want more understanding. People like Chloe and others. This is interesting. As a non-ADOS Black man, I had to learn a lot about the Black experience in America. And the fact that you were willing to learn instead of prejudging, that says a lot about you. Do you think Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams are good for Black conservatism, or are they just like Black Conservative Inc.? And again, I haven't studied a lot of the old school Black conservatives. I've read some Sowell. I actually plan on reading more. He has a lot of good things to say, and so did Walter Williams. I don't think they're just like Black Conservative Inc. I'm sure that they have a lot of ideas that I disagree with, but from what I've seen and from what I've read, they acknowledge the impact of racism. They just contend that Black people can succeed despite the impact of racism. There's a lot of people who argue that. I mean, look at Black Wall Street in Tulsa and in other areas of the country. There were a lot of Black Wall Streets. I mean, we have Atlanta now. Black people have been able to overcome a lot, and we still are. This does not mean, though, that we shouldn't deal with the racism issue. This doesn't mean that we shouldn't minimize the impact of racism as much as possible, but it does mean that we shouldn't wait until we've eliminated racism to build up the Black community. I think most Black people agree with that as well. Black people may disagree as to the extent to which racism has an impact, but I think most Black people would agree we need solutions now, and we need to do these. We need to put these solutions into action, regardless of what the government's doing, to build ourselves up. So, yeah. So I think I'm gonna stop right there. But before I sign off, thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. Please share this video. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell so that you'll know when I go live or when I post another video. Check out my audio podcast. You can get it on iTunes. I'm going to put the link to it. There's actually two Fresh Perspectives on iTunes. One of them was my old podcast. I'm trying to have that removed, but look for this logo and you'll have the right one. but I'm also going to put a link to it in the show notes also. I did my first episode last week, so please give me a 5-star rating. That's going to help me immensely. And just write a little short review saying how much you love me. It can be 2-3 sentences, or if you want to write a novel, that's fine too. That'll help me out a lot. Sign up for my locals.com community. It's at afreshperspective.locals.com. And it's only $4.99 per month, and you'll get premium content. As a matter of fact, the video that I'm going to do tomorrow on why I don't blame white conservatives, that's going to be behind the paywall. So if you want to see it, again, just $4.99 per month. And before I sign off, or until next time, actually, keep your minds free.